Well, let's now turn to the other big story that we're tracking on the urban debate. The focus is yet again on passenger safety and inconvenience by airlines. 3 incidents of flight mishaps in a single day has now raised questions over flight safety. In 2 separate incidents, a Delhi-bound SpiceJet flight that took off from Patna made an emergency landing after one of its engines caught fire after a bird hit. In another incident, a Delhi-bound SpiceJet flight again from Guwahati returned to the takeoff place of Guwahati again, the Guwahati airport, after a single engine, after a bird hit one of the engines, and the passengers then were safely evacuated in both these cases. DGCA has now ordered a probe into these incidents as well as a probe into a third incident, which includes return of a Jabalpur-bound IndiGo flight from Delhi due to pressurization issue. So these 3 instances have forced us to ask questions on passenger safety. 2 incidents of bird hitting airlines mid-air were reported, like I just mentioned, from Patna and Guwahati on the same day. Aviation Regulator, DGCA, has now written to all airports. In a letter, DGCA has instructed all airports to now immediately review wildlife hazard management plan during the monsoons. The letter also says that the airports must keep a check inside and outside airports for activities and also indulge in spraying insecticide. Frequent runway inspections must be done. Deployment of bird chasers and scaring devices must be deployed. Avoidance of water concentration and open drains in operational area has been made mandatory. Those are the points that DGCA has raised today. So let me welcome, joining us here on the program, Dr. Sanat Kaul, former Civil Aviation Joint Secretary, Government of India; Neetu Shukla, former in-flight service who worked with the airlines earlier. Also joining us here, Vayan Sharma, CEO, Kimes Aviation. I want to begin with you, Neetu Shukla. Very good evening to all of you and thanks for joining us. When it comes to a crisis of this nature, what do you make out of what could have happened? Of course, these are mishaps. We are calling it no damage caused to any passenger. The aircrafts was evacuated in time. But what really happens in that moment? If you can share your experience of why these instances are happening with this kind of regularity now.
So basically, I think the most critical phase of any flight is your takeoff and landing. That's where most of the crashes happen. So at that point of time, the pilots need total concentration and they need an absolute perfect takeoff. What happens is the bird activity is generally at a lower altitude. If a bird hits the fuselage of an aircraft, it causes minimal damage. It's not a good thing, of course. There have been instances of the windshield cracking in the cockpit, and any sort of structural damage to the aircraft is dangerous. However, if it gets into the engine, it becomes a little more dangerous than that. We've all seen the movie Sully, which is based on a real-life incident, and we know that all the engines could also stall. The aircraft not facing this kind of issues generally lies with the airports. They need to ensure that there is no bird activity around the airports. If the bird actually hits the aircraft and if there is an emergency, being the most critical phase of the flight, it's extremely scary. There is very minimal contact even with the cockpit at this point of time. So for the news to even travel to the rest of the crew about what happened and what action to take becomes a little more difficult. Of course, everybody is trained and they can handle these situations. But these situations are best avoided. So I think it depends on totally on the support services down by the airport authorities to ensure that there are no bird activities around, because it can be extremely dangerous.
What is the kind of due diligence that the airline need to do, Mr. Vayan Sharma? Do you see any laxity, any lapse on the part of the airlines in question in these 3 instances?
I must say not at all. Because what you see here, what has happened is in 2 instances, it's a bird hit. And there's precious little that the airline can do about bird activity around the airfields. that is actually the responsibility of the airport operator per se. And in the SpiceJet incident, in fact, the bird hit happened just as the aircraft rotated, as in when it was running down the runway for takeoff, and just as it rotated, that is the time the bird hit happened, which meant that the bird was actually inside the vicinity of the airfield. Normally, at any airfield, you have enough devices by which you have sound systems by which you scare away the birds from being around. And it normally works. And it's sometimes you have a stray incident like this, and it is very laudable how the pilot conducted herself in this case. That at that stage, when you have an engine failure at just about takeoff height, which is hardly anything, to be able to maneuver, do the complete circuit, and come and land the aircraft safely. I think it speaks volumes for the training and the maturity of the crew concerned.
But then, the question is of passenger safety, Dr. Sanat Kaul. The DGCA has rightly taken note of these three instances of immediately short of instructions for a probe. But then, the fact is inconveniences are caused. I mean, for all those passengers there to have this kind of a scare, to reschedule their plans. So in the overall scenario, can such instances be averted, or you think that this is part of the territory? There's only so much you can rule out.
Okay, now I think I'll just go back to the last issue which we were discussing. The basic thing is that there are two issues involved. One is bird hit, and one is what is the responsibility. Now, these are serious incidents. This is not an accident. This did not lead to any fatality, but these are very serious incidents. They have to be taken seriously. Monsoon is a time when bird hits are on the higher side because the birds come down and the insects go up and all sorts of other things. But the airports are, in a way, responsible for ensuring that the bird hits or the birds are not around. So they clean up the airport, the areas around it, the garbage cleaning, birds are not attracted. However, this takes place. Now, what happened in this one particular case is that the bird hit was so damaging, which is normally not the case with the present engines, that the engine caught fire. Now, the fire, the pilot never got to know about the fire till the air traffic control reported that. Now, it is very surprising with so many instruments available at the disposal of the pilot regarding the engine that he was not able to say that there is a fire on. The fire was noticed by outsiders. In a previous case, nothing to do with this case, another airline reported a case of fire in the engine. But the engines are well equipped, and the pilot should be looking at the various instruments available to him to see if there's anything wrong with the engine. However, this seemed to have been missed out. There could be some in future, maybe some camera or something which can be put in the outside of the plane facing the engine to see whether the engines are working perfectly. But it is a little surprising that the pilot never realized that there's a fire on in one of the engines, and it was reported only by the air traffic. The second thing is about, well, bird hit as such is unfortunate, but it happens. It is something which we can't do. But in one case, there was also decompression,
yes,
which took place. And
yes,
that is certainly the part of the airline and the maintenance of the aircraft, which is at fault. And DGCA, I'm sure, is going to look into it and see how this happened at all. This never happens. These modern aircraft are not going in for this kind of a decompression. How did it happen? Was there a maintenance problem? These things are serious and they have to be looked in, and I'm sure they will be looked.
So
as I said,
yes. No, finish your point.
At one end bird hit at one end is a problem which the airport has to handle, the specific airport. At the same time, engine catching fire is a serious issue which the pilot should have known through the various instruments that he has. Got lots of instruments to gauge the temperature of the engine, this, that, and the other. I mean, I can't go into all that, and I'm not a technical person that way. But he should have realized, why did he have to get information from the air control tower that your engine is on fire?
And time would be precious, isn't it? I mean, these are all split-second decisions one has to take.
absolutely.
And, perhaps that kind of presence of mind is required. Neetu Shukla, did you, even in your experience as working as an in-flight in charge, ever have to deal with something like this?
So an engine catching fire, even though it sounds very serious, is not something that doesn't happen at all. These things tend to happen for various reasons in case of emergencies. The cowling of the aircraft is equipped with internal fire extinguishers, and these get activated the minute there's a fire, and they extinguish the fire. In addition to that, because no aircraft works, these kind of big aircrafts don't work on a single engine, the engine is shut off for additional safety because the engine of the aircraft is inside the cowling, which is under the wings. So these are measures which are taken immediately by pilots, and this is done based on the training that they receive, which is why they keep going for their simulator trainings very often. And I think the pilots handled it beautifully. One of the major issues of having to turn around and land such a heavy aircraft is the landing weight is supposed to be lesser than a takeoff weight. And if the plane just takes off and you have to land it again, the landing weight and the takeoff weight is almost the same. And that's the reason everybody is praising the pilot, because she handled it beautifully and landed the aircraft very nicely. The maintenance issue of depressurization is something which is scary, which needs to be looked into. And I think this is happening because there were a lot of aircrafts that were grounded and the airlines are going through financial crunch and probably not maintaining the aircrafts the way they should be. So in case of the depressurization, I think that is something that seriously needs to be looked into.
Wayan Sharma, last word to you. Of course, one instance of that depressurization, we all agree, I think is a very serious matter. About the others, and to what extent should airlines be held responsible? How far they should do the due diligence to avert these instances?
Like to add two things here. That one, on the point that Neetu was making, that with a full load, which is all passengers and full fuel, when you come into land, you are carrying as much weight as you practically took off. And Patna is classified as what they call a critical airfield, as in that for the operation of airline aircraft 737, 320, the runway length is actually slightly less than what is considered ideal for this, for coming in for landing with full weight. That's one. Now talking about decompression. Now technically this wasn't a decompression which happened. It was that compression did not happen. They took off. They were at 6,000 feet, and that's the time when the pressure outside the aircraft starts dropping, and you increase the pressure inside to keep your passengers at a comfortable, what we call mean sea level pressure. Now, when they realized that the pressurization is not happening, they did not go beyond 6,000 feet. And they turned around and landed the aircraft. So it wasn't decompression, is when the aircraft inside is pressurized and there's a loss of pressure, which can lead to a very, very serious incident. In this case, it was that pressurization does not happen. And what we keep, hearing in the media, we say that DGCA has ordered an inquiry. Ma'am, it's not a new thing. It is routine.
But you know what? This Fisher, if I may add, is because the same airlines and their names keep coming up, which is why I keep bringing up, I keep asking this question, whether the airlines in question have anything to do with this. It's the SpiceJet. That their name has come in a number of such instances. This time,
unfortunately, in this country, you have only 3
which
or
is
4
why
airlines.
One has to take a closer look at whether that kind of of course, we must be grateful that no untoward incident or no damage to human life happened, and nothing scary really happened. The pilot saved the day, the air traffic control saved the day. But of course, we have to set systems in place to minimize such instances. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanat Kaul, Neetu Shukla and Wayan Sharma for joining us this evening.